What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And thank you guys for tuning in to another video. Ladies and gentlemen, final rosters are in, and Blake and I are here to react to them, as well as give you guys 5 storylines to follow for the BC Lions this upcoming season. But, of course, before we get into all today's fun on today's episode, Blake's joining me as always. Blake, how are we doing, buddy?
Yeah, doing good. I'm excited that the preseason is finally over with. I know the Lions suffered a bit of a tough luck loss, if you will, in the final preseason game against those darn Edmonton Elks, but doesn't matter. So it doesn't hurt as much as it would if that game counted in the standings. But it's always nice to try and at least get a win in the preseason, which unfortunately the Lions could do. But as we've seen, history has proven that's it's not exactly a death blow to any CFL team.
No, not by any means. And of course, we're giving them a little full sense of confidence for this upcoming weekend. Give them the victory last week, and we'll take it in week one. But that being said, Blake, it is here, buddy. It is finally June. Of course, we wait all off season of is it June yet? Is it June yet? And of course, we are finally here. I know we talked about it last episode we got together, and just the excitement for both you and I of getting together with Shane and Coach on a weekly basis now, and you and I getting together, for our previews, our post game, and of course a few other BC Line and other related content. So it's exciting times, buddy. And of course, you and I will be in attendance for the season opener this upcoming Saturday when the BC Lions host the Edmonton Elks for, of course, the season opener. But it's been built up as the concert kickoff as well, with Snoop Dogg coming to play the pregame concert. So exciting times, Blake. But just how are you feeling, buddy? I know I talked about the CFL as a whole, but how are you feeling as Lions fans, and we're able to be in attendance for week one?
Yeah, it's been too long since we were at BC Place. I believe it was the end of October last year. So if you go by that, it's been over, I believe, 8 7 8 months, something like that, by the time we're stepping back into BC Place once again. As of course, unfortunately, the Lions were unable to host a postseason game as they were the 2 years before that, and their season ended prematurely with that loss to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So it'll be nice to see you in person again. I know we talked throughout the off season, but it's not exactly in person. I know our buddy Andrew from the Turf District will be in attendance as well, and I'm sure a few other people, Lions season ticket holders, a few other Elks fans, stuff like that, that'll be making the trip to BC for the season opener.
Yeah, man, looking forward to it. Um, the uh, the beautiful side, I guess I should say. I should try to find a good way to spin this, but having some troubles, Blake, with the ferries, of course, because the Hulo is already sold out for the. There was actually a perfect one, Blake, that would have been leaving Vancouver at midnight. Now I'm probably gonna have to take a Horseshoe Bay from at about 10:40, so it's gonna be probably either I'm gonna have to
That's tight.
leave the game a little bit early, unfortunately, Blake, and we know what happens when you leave a game early in the CFL. You never can do that, or you won't be able to live it down. Um, that being said, Blake, it's going to be fun to be in the building anyways, and we're going to figure that out afterwards. Before Blake and I get into some depth chart reactions and top 5 storylines for the BC Lions, of course, please be sure to leave a like on the video, comment down below, and of course, smash the subscribe button for Blake and I. It would be greatly appreciated as we close in on 400 subscribers. We are 380 right now. The Instagram channel is killing it, so head on over there as well. Follow the Instagram channel at Canadian Football Fanatics. And of course, you guys can follow us on Twitter or X as well at _CF Fanatics over there as well. So, Blake, I think let's get into it, buddy, and we can pull it up here with us. And this will be our first look unofficially at the BC Lions depth chart. I don't know if I can make it any bigger for you, Blake, because I know you're
I was
probably
gonna
on your
say, yeah, that's it's pretty small, but we'll go with it. It's fine.
for your phone, but I'm able to probably talk you through it as well. Um, but we can kind of go through a little bit of reaction. We also, Blake, can go the next page over, and we have kind of who's on our practice roster as well listed, and then projected unofficially who will be maybe potentially on the one game IR, as well as the 6-game IR, and obviously Siona Tama is suspended this season as well. So before we get into the practice roster and other things, this is kind of my first projection at what I think the BC Lions could potentially line up like they could potentially line up like on Saturday. So obviously this is going to fluctuate throughout the season. Guys are going to be brought off and on the practice roster, and guys are going to get hurt, of course. And of course, Blake, we had the unfortunate of 2 weeks in a row losing a projected starting offensive
Hmm.
lineman go down in the first series of the game. Prayers and thoughts and well wishes goes out to David Foucault. Didn't look too good. A lengthy commercial break was ensued afterwards. So didn't look good, and I know the card came out. So I believe he's on the 6-game injury list to start the season. I'm not too sure if we're going to see Foucault again this season. Unfortunately, I would probably lean towards potentially maybe it was a break or something like that, and a veteran already. It's unfortunate that went down so early in a preseason game like that, and was with Una being down, it was probably his right guard position um, to hold at least to go into the season. So Blake, I mean, that's a perfect point for us to start here. As you can see, Blake, we have our starting offensive lineman projection from left to right. Pretty much you could put these guys in Sharpie with obviously Joe Broxton, starter for the BC Lions for the last number of years at left tackle, probably up until the addition of Dejon Allen, our best offensive lineman over the last few years.
Hmm.
Broxton at left tackle. Corey Woodruff was a guy that was a practice roster player for us last year. Came in for us at points throughout the season. I believe started the Touchdown Pacific game in specifically,
He did.
and a few other games as well for the Lions. And he spoke when Baker was able to interview him and talked about feeling like he was a starter all along last year and being able to get the opportunity to go with the ones all training camp and stuff like that was a good opportunity for him, and hopefully he's able to hit the ground running and um, be a above average starter. I think is kind of all we're asking for. Obviously, if he turns out to be a all CFL all star type player, it would be fantastic. But if he could just be an above average starter, I think that would go a long way to helping out the rest of the offensive line. um, Corey Woodruff as well is a pretty um, has some nice position flexibility as well for injury purposes with only drafting him, potentially seven, could be six offensive linemen on game day. We'll see how things work out. Corey Woodruff as well, I believe, started the game down in Victoria at left tackle. Can play a little bit of left, slide out to play outside as well, but I think he works better in a phone booth there in the interior and left guard. I'm interested to see how he kind of sink or swim with nobody really, kind of behind him with Chris Slugger, the supposed to be the competition for him there going into training camp, had to kind of move over to right tackle for Dejon Allen dealing with his back spasms. Now, Chris Slugger kind of coming back to left guard. He has to be shuffled over pretty quickly, and things are going to kind of play out how they will. You look at center Blake, I would appear it's going to look like Mike Couture is going to win his job back once again. The free agent signing back with the Lions this offseason. The familiarity with Buck Pierce and his system with Mike Couture coming over from Winnipeg. I believe 2024 was his first season, or maybe 2023 was his first season with the Lions. But having experience in the Buck Pierce system, I think goes a long way into helping him as well in winning the competition over Tyler Packer, who I was pretty high on, vocal on wanting to see maybe the Lions go in that direction going into this season. I think a potential cheaper option there, but Couture, the veteran, hopefully he can have a bounce back year. Last year was definitely had some ups, had some downs, and I think Tyler Packer being insurance at backup center is a good position to have there. Some depth at center. At right guard, Blake, I think is where things get interesting now. With obviously as we talked about, uh, I don't know because it's on the depth chart, Blake, as George, or on the website as George Una, but I believe they want him to be referred as Anna Una. Um,
Yeah.
with him going down and David Foucault going down, there is quite a bit of question marks now, I think, going into the season at right guard. It appears that it would be probably Chris Schlugger with him slotting in there after the injury to David Foucault went down in the game. Chris Schlugger played the right guard position for the rest of his time in the game. So I would appear that he probably likely slides over into that position now Where I will hesitate a little bit, obviously, is Andrew Pearson has started at right guard before, has that experience. I think the negative thing for Andrew Pearson is that I think he is so versatile at so many positions, including his, jumbo tight end position, the extra offensive lineman that, Buck Pierce has kind of been known to use. We saw it be used with Jordan Maximick's offense last year. I think Buck Pierce even kind of uses it even more. So I think Pearson being that extra offensive lineman is kind of a comfortable position for the offense and for Pearson. So I'm curious to see if, he even gets the nod over a guy like Slugger, as well as potentially Tyler Packer, a guy that had to play right guard for, I believe, one game last season, could have been two when Couture came back and when the Lions dealt with some injuries. So another, possibility to keep an eye on, I think, is those kind of three names there that you see, the two in orange with Tyler Packer and Andrew Pearson, and then Slugger as well. I think is probably the favorite, I guess you could say, when it comes to the right guard position as of now. And then of course Dejon Allen, who we were, pretty thankful to see. I think Blake playing some game action there
Yeah.
in on Friday night, dealing with the back spasms throughout training camp. Looked to be more so of a lot of precaution for a veteran guy like that who's been through it, not wanting to rush him in there, being able to, I would imagine, get all his, visual reps and stuff like that, learning off to the side and studying throughout his playbook and stuff like that. So good to see that Dejon Allen was able to get some game action before the regular season, that he's all good. Or obviously big addition after trading, you know, a draft pick and Ryder Varga for Dejon Allen. I think it would be great to see him in all 18 games this season and anchor this offensive lineman and really help bring the floor and rise the floor a little bit higher in terms of the skill level of the rest of the offensive lineman. I think being able to have those two bookend tackles will go a long way to helping the interior when it comes to those three guys working in tandem together and able to help each other out will, I think, help them three uh, play a little bit better. But Blake, judging by what the depth chart looks like, there's no kind of surprises when it comes to the offensive line. It's all pretty much who we had in mind in terms of starting. Obviously, the interior looks a little bit different with Una and Foucault being injured, but what's just kind of your general feelings with the offensive line going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it's a lot of the same names that we expected to see. And I know you and I will get into this as the show goes on, but there wasn't a lot of surprises, not only on the offensive line, but I would argue that throughout the whole roster, there wasn't a lot of surprises, surprise cuts. I know there was a couple that I saw you tweeted out that you were a little bit surprised as. There was one name that you and I were both surprised at because we had a little bit of maybe inside information, we'll call it, that there might have been more of a battle than we had thought. And that's kind of all we'll say on that for the moment. But yeah, in general, like it's the same 7, 8 names that we thought were going to be there on the offensive line, minus, of course, David Foku and Anu Una. Una's, I believe, injury is less severe than Foku's. I believe he might start on the 6 game injured list, but he could be pulled off that. Foku, I don't think it's been confirmed by the Lions just yet, but the rumors that I was hearing out of Edmonton as that game kind of concluded and I was listening to the post game show was that unfortunately it did look like it was unfortunately a break for David Foku and he will probably be out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so moving on from the offensive line, Blake, getting into the backfield here before we get out to the receivers. No surprises too much. I think the only little bit of a surprise is that even Farhan Lalji mentioned on a back and forth with our friend Shane Ryan of 13th Man Football. The depth chart had, I believe, Bryce over Masoli, and we saw Bryce running get some reps before Masoli. Farhan mentioned that he thought Bryce is potentially the backup quarterback, with Masoli being the number three. And I think that is still a little bit of unquestioned or unclear whether Masoli is the backup or Bryce is the backup. Either way, I think it's a great option to have. I think Masoli is very comfortable on the West Coast. He's close to home. He mentioned of being in the same time zone as his family who lives down in California. I think if he was to slide down the depth chart into that number three role, I think he would take it a little less personal than say maybe even last season or a few years ago, where he knows he's kind of in that mentor situation where he can mentor a guy like Nathan Rourke, help him see the field, see things that maybe Nathan isn't seeing, from obviously when the bullets are flying, Masouli's over on the sideline, or maybe he's up in the booth when he's not active, or maybe if that third quarterback isn't active. That being said, up and down preseason, I think for Bryce, I thought that he struggled a little bit more than going back and rewatching the game down in Victoria and the box score numbers. He was obviously 14 to 20 down in Victoria. I think just over 100 yards and a touchdown. Pretty solid effort. When sitting there live, it looked like he struggled a little bit more. It looked like the kind of pressure was getting to him, and he had some hot feet. I don't mind it. I kind of still question a little bit of our depth behind Nathan Rourke. But that being said, I think we're not planning to have Nathan Rourke not be our quarterback, so not too many surprises in terms of any of those guys being cut. At running back, as you alluded to, Blake, I think both you and I, with obviously you or me, letting I heard some rumblings potentially of Jordan Tyrell, pushing James Butler for the first team snaps, and we saw him both preseason games start for the BC Lions at running back, get a lot of runway, and obviously that was the BC Lions wanting to really evaluate Jordan Tyrell a lot, and obviously they had some question marks about him, and he was with the team last season. I was curious, whether or not a practice squad spot would be kind of a possibility for one of Horvath or Terrell if they didn't make it, and thought that was likely. But obviously, with Horvath kind of being a former NFL draft pick, having NFL experience, I don't think he would kind of sit well with that. And then Jordan Tyrell sitting on the practice roster last season and probably wanting his opportunity this season, probably wanting to be just straight up released so he can maybe catch on within their team. And the unfortunate thing for him is probably not seeing the landscape of later later that day, or maybe even the next day, of Walter Fletcher and Kadeem Carey being released as well, and kind of that free agent
Kevin
running
Brown as
back.
well.
Yeah, Kevin Brown as well. That free agent running back pool gets even bigger, and just shows, I think, the unfortunate side of playing the running back position, of just the devalued side of it now, just in the NFL as well, of just teams are kind of scared to pay them number one. They're scared to kind of invest in them long term because of the injuries that can come into them, and just the nature of the position of just kind of running cheap running backs into the ground and then moving on to the next one, because you can find a cheaper one on a cheap deal where you can kind of replace them at the same, almost the same level of play type thing, or try to find the same level of play in a running back. You obviously get the Brady Oliveira's where you invest in them, and maybe even before that Andrew Harris's and stuff like that, where you invest in running backs in the Canadian Football League, but it's definitely far and few between. That being said, Jordan Tyrell gets straight up released by the BC Lions, and the BC Lions will go with JB James Butler at the starting running back position. Where I think you and I are pretty happy about that. We were both had kind of our eyebrows raised when we heard rumblings of even Jordan Tyrell kind of pushing, JB for some RB1 reps, and kind of just even rumblings of that happening was kind of a little bit, like we said, eye raising. And I'm really excited to see James Butler back in BC. We saw it last year with him and Hamilton. Blake, when he came to BC, he was very motivated to play the Lions and had one of his better games last season. Xander Horvath, Blake, is another guy I'm very excited about. They talked about kind of the David Mackey 2.0, that he looks kind of like his doppelganger, wearing 34, is a little bit taller than David Mackey, but is a slender, kind of that running back, fullback slash type. But I think he's a little bit more athletic than David Mackey, which is saying something, because Mackey is very athletic for being a fullback. But Horvath, I think, is going to be a guy that we're going to see contribute, Blake, on game day because of his special teams ability, as well as I think we'll get some carries from James Butler as well, in terms of wanting to see him in the screen game, running downhill. I think the Lions will use him and take advantage of that asset, very much so, for sure. And then you look at Riley Pickett, a guy who, I kind of teased on our Instagram page of, the BC Lions' new secret weapon, or I should have maybe said Swiss Army knife, with Riley Pickett playing fullback. The defensive lineman turned long snapper turned fullback now, with him kind of cross training at fullback last season, with David Mackey going through some injuries. Um, David Mackey going through some injuries. Pickett obviously having to step in to play some fullback last season. Throughout the offseason, I would imagine, kind of being friends with David Mackey, probably hearing rumblings that, I'm thinking about retiring. You should start to, really dive into playing fullback full time. Pickett's going to hit the ground running this season and look to, be rewarded as the starting fullback for the team. we saw him used quite a bit in the preseason in terms of, as I mentioned, the extra jumbo tight end offensive lineman and Andrew Pearson. They went with double tight ends in Riley Pickett coming on the field, Andrew Pearson. I think we're going to see that formation quite a bit down around the goal line, especially, and even in short yardage situations, as well as anytime they want to run the ball and even set up play action. I think because we saw Riley Pickett's versatility catching the ball out of the backfield. Although I think that one pass from Nathan Rourke, the first one, kind of Nathan threw the ball so hard it almost caught Riley Pickett more so than Riley Pickett caught the ball. But I think Pickett's going to be able to be a versatile weapon because he's reliable. He's going to be able to dig his nose in, get dirty, be able to lend a hand in blocking, and will be a versatile weapon for us as well. Blake, is there any thoughts on the backfield when it comes to quarterback, running back, and the fullback position before we get into the receivers?
No, I mean, the quarterback, of course, everyone knew that um, even at the end of last year, Nathan Rourke was going to be the unquestioned number one this season. And James Butler, as you mentioned, we were a little surprised to hear that possibly he was on the bubble. And with the running backs that got released today, as we already mentioned, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had been cut. I mean, knowing what you and I already kind of knew, and then with all the other running backs. But I am happy that he made the roster, and I'm really excited to see what Riley Pickett can do. Of course, a new offensive coordinator and a new head coach, which is the same guy this year in Buck Pierce. But we saw how important that fullback position last year was, as the BC Lions used David Mackey a heck of a lot last year, especially in short yardage down on the goal line. So I expect more of the same with Riley Pickett this year.
Yeah, and then getting into the receivers, Blake, no surprises as well with the starters at X. We got Stanley Berryhill. At R, we got Keon Hatcher. At the Y position, we got Javon Katoy, McInnes at the W, and Eberhardt at the Z. All just different wide receiver position, Blake's. The letters don't mean too much, except for you can kind of tag the letters for individual routes in the play call and stuff like that. So just receivers to for clarification for anybody that's maybe a little bit confused. When it comes to the depth positions, though, it looks like the team likes Kieran Passat. Still very high on him. I was curious with regime changing and Passant being a previous regime holdover with coming in for Coach Campbell and Buck Pierce coming in. Obviously, he has ties with Neil McAvoy and Roderick Maiden being familiar with him, and having a quiet preseason. I think his special teams ability is probably what gave him the edge over maybe an Ezekiel Tiede who had maybe a louder preseason when it comes to more productive and stuff like that. Who I thought would potentially get captive on the active roster, Ezekiel Tiede. We'll see in a little bit here. He got stashed on the practice roster. Even a Bryson John, Vancouver College alumni, I thought he had a few opportunities in the preseason where it looked like they wanted to really get an opportunity to look at him. But just knowing, I guess, what Kieran Passant looks like in regular season action, having spent the offseason with Nathan Rourke training and whatnot, I think that went a long way for him staying on the active roster. And well, and then we look at backing up Keon Hatcher at the R position. I think Jermaine Jackson is a guy we're going to see a lot in the offense. Like I think could possibly be a gadget guy when it comes to maybe being like the Nick Dembski of this offense with, obviously Buck Pierce coming over, a guy that's going to run those jet sweeps, kind of that gadget type player, right? Where we get the ball in his hands and he's really fast type player. We actually seen it down in Victoria. Blake, he was the guy that got Nathan Rourke's one pass for 7 yards, the little forward pass technically, but jet sweep down in Victoria there. Jermaine Jackson's a guy that I really think that BC Lions fans should kind of look out for and keep an eye on in terms of being a dynamic playmaker. Obviously, the last few years, Blake, why am I punt returner from the last few years?
Oh,
Terry Williams,
yeah.
brought some spark at times for the BC Lions, but I think his maybe downfall or the thing that I think Lions fans want a little bit more were kind of that home run threat ability of popping one maybe every now and then, right? When I think Jermaine Jackson maybe brings that, and then hopefully we see that throughout the season here with being able to pop a return or two, and I think being able to get the ball in his hands on offense will be something to look out for as well. So, Blake, is there any other thoughts on the receivers before we flip over to the defense? I think kind of as I said, business as usual, as kind of you said as well on the kind of entire roster as well.
Yeah, as Aiden Eberhart looks like he'll win that starter position at the Z position with Kieran Prasant as his backup. But we saw both of those guys last year. Both contributed in different segments for the BC Lions. And then everyone else is pretty much, as you said, business as usual. Stanley Berryhill got more and more comfortable as the year went on. Keon Hatcher, guys like that. No surprises with the receivers really at all.
I think I speak for the both of us, Blake, that obviously, you know, no shock here, but you and I are both, as high as anybody on Justin McInnis, expecting
Yeah.
him to have a big season this year. But I think I speak for both of us in saying that I truly believe that I think Keon Hatcher has himself a better season than we saw
Oh
last
yeah.
season with him coming off the Achilles tear and, you know, getting up there in age. And I think just the natural side of dealing with an injury like that, you're not going to just obviously we've seen it now with modern technology and modern science and medicine and stuff like that where guys are coming back faster and faster, but it's not as likely as maybe some think or would like to hope. And I think Keon Hatcher taking the whole offseason to be healthy and work with Nathan Rourke, being in Vancouver and stuff like that. I don't know if we see a 2022 version of Hatcher where he was up to top five receiving yards in the CFL and had himself a really great season and looked like he was right in the conversation for being a top five receiver in the CFL. But I think he gets back to around 1,000 yard season, a very active and very high contributor for the BC Lions this season. So interested to see how the rest of the receivers play out. I think general thoughts are that a lot of people are maybe a little bit more down on Berryhill and Eberhart outside of the fan base or maybe even in the fan base as well. Because I know speaking with guys like Farhan is there's some question marks within the receivers outside of the first few guys, obviously McInnis, Kotoy, and Hatcher. But I'm really high on I think a guy like Aiden Eberhart. I think he's going to excel in year number 2 in the CFL and really thrive in his role in terms of being that little kind of receiver underneath. And I think him and Nathan Rourke showed a little bit of chemistry last season. And I'm really excited to see it, like what a guy like Aiden Eberhart looks like in the offense this season, and even a guy like Stanley Berryhill with speed he brings. I think seeing a guy like Jermaine Jackson kind of be on the roster should push him to play at a high level. And if he's not, Jermaine Jackson, I think could even potentially fill a position like that as well in the offense. So to flip over on defense, Blake here to get into it before we take a little too long, because I know Blake's got to go here in about 45 minutes is what we want to get Blake out of here in. So let's start in the secondary, Blake, and work our way back here. So to start here in the boundary, Blake, and then in the field, how I was kind of explaining last week or a few weeks ago without kind of the diagram here, Blake, is just the boundary would be the short side of the field, as we can see here with there's only two receivers to the boundary, the short side of the field, more likely than not. Obviously, sometimes the boundary could have three sides just based on the formation, but right now, likely the boundary, you're going to have two receivers in there. And, Gary Peters is more known than the boundary corner this season. It appears if things stay as they are or were kind of set in training camp that Gary Peters is going to play the right side of the field while Deontay Williams is going to play the left side of the field. Now, things were shuffled around a little bit, which we will talk about here. So things could be a little bit different. Gary Peters could stay in that boundary all season instead of flipping over right and left because the boundary, Blake, basically is made up by where the football is. So if the football is on the left hash right now, the boundary would be as it is. If the football was, say, on the right hash, the boundary would be on the right side. It's depending on where the football is. So as of now, Gary Peters will be the right corner or in the boundary. Jalen Edwards Cooper is going to line up at the boundary halfback position, which is an interesting one, Blake, because Jalen Edwards Cooper played corner for us in the past where Deontay Williams is right now, Blake, that right cornerback position where it says D. Williams on the right side of the field. That's where Edwards Cooper normally played or has played for the BC Lions in the past few seasons. That being said, he's going to transition over to where TJ Lee normally plays, or obviously TJ Lee moved over to the Sam or the nickel position last season, but TJ Lee predominantly for the last, half a decade with Gary Peters man the boundary side of the field at that boundary halfback position. We're going to see what Jalen Edwards Cooper could potentially do. If there is some shuffling around, it appears that Ronald Kent could potentially come over and play that boundary halfback position with a guy like Robert Carter Jr. coming off the practice roster and playing that halfback position with some guys shuffling around if things shuffle the way they potentially could. And then we look at safety, Blake. Of course, you and I are both, very high on a guy like Christophe Boyu. We saw him make plays dating back to his first training camp last season. The team has been raving about him this training camp as well. Excited to see him in year number 2, and then obviously the depth behind him and a guy like Jackson Finley, the draft pick, I think will be more contributing on special teams this season just due to Buyu being in front of him. But obviously with injuries and stuff like that, I would stay tuned because as you can see, Blake, there's not too many backups in the secondary right now other than Patrice Rene, Jackson Finley. So Finley's, I think, versatility, and same with Patrice Rene, their versatility kind of go a long way for them being on the active roster for, being in a pinch if injuries start to happen. I think those guys can fill in and shuffle around and have to play in a pinch, a halfback position or maybe in a Sam position as well. So safety, I think, is in good hands. You look at halfback into the field with Ronald Kent Jr. We saw him make a play in the preseason. Blake was a very good,
Mm-hmm.
interception on Trey Ford. It was a great, playmaking, showed great playmaking skills. And then Deontay Williams is the uh, corner defensive back who we got from Saskatchewan in the offseason. Blake, a guy that played behind Roland Milligan last season, played a little bit of corner as well. It appears, for the majority of training camp, he was lined up, as I said, Blake, at that field cornerback position or the left cornerback position, where if he does end up playing corner, he's just going to stay on the left side of the field the whole game, where Gary Peters is going to stay on the right side of the field the whole game. I think it also gives Gary Peters an opportunity, Blake, where teams are, trying to stay away from Gary Peters. If he's on the right side of the field the whole game, they're going to have to attack him at some point, and Gary Peters is going to be able to, be a playmaker even more than usual because if he's in the boundary, teams can kind of stay away from him, or quarterbacks more so than teams, because he's his presence is a little bit more up front, I guess, being in the boundaries, a little bit up closer to the quarterback's peripheral. So Deontay Williams, Blake, is what I'm saying. If there is some shuffling around, there's been some rumblings that Deontay Williams, the cornerback, Blake, here in the right side of the field, could potentially be playing at the Sam linebacker position here, where Tyler Coyle is, or the nickel position is what Ryan Rigmain and the staff is wanting it to be called. I'm just more familiar with Sam, and I think is more a general football terminology. So I'm just going to go with Sam for now. So Blake, when it looks at the secondary, Blake, there with Gary Peters, Edwards Cooper, Boyu, Finley, Ronald Kent, and Deontay Williams, any kind of just what are your, I guess, your general thoughts, as I was saying, kind of on offense for the secondary?
Yeah, I think that Gary Peters, of course, and Jalen Edwards Cooper will be looked at as the leaders of the secondary. And Christophe Beaulieu, as you mentioned, looks like has won the starter position, which was he was more of a depth piece, a backup last year. He did get some fair playing time, but never really as a starter. So that'll be interesting to see it. His backup now will be the man that they drafted this year in Jackson Finley. So that was great to see that the former Vancouver player, his high school escapes me at the moment, but I know he's
Vancouver
from
College.
the Vancouver College player, made the roster, the 16th overall pick from this year. So that was great to see, and he obviously did enough in the preseason to earn himself that opportunity to be on the active roster come week number 1.
So looking at the linebackers now, Blake, I think other than the two starters at will linebacker, which will be Ben Haladic here in orange, just for clarification here, folks, we have all of our national players in orange, and then we have our blue players representing our global players. So Maxim Rioy, I believe is how it's pronounced, and then Carl Myers, obviously our punter here in blue, and then the guys in black are obviously our American players as well. So we look at the linebacker position, Blake. At will linebacker position, it looks like Ben Haladic will take over that position once again. Micah Alway will be our middle linebacker. And then, I think to stay with we'll go with will linebacker. I think this is all still up for question in terms who will dress on game day. I think there will be probably upwards around about 6 guys that dress in between those two positions together, just for special teams purposes and stuff like that. So you look backing up Isaiah Messam, or Ben Haladic potentially is Isaiah Messam, another national linebacker, Blake. Adam Konar, another national linebacker, and then Terrence Gagne, another national linebacker. Adam Konar, actually, Blake, former Langley Ram. So shout out to
Mm-hmm.
him, with CJFL alum, obviously, coming over from Edmonton as well. And then, as I said, Maxim Royoy as well. All guys that have been on with the Lions the past few years. Adam Konar, coming over from Edmonton, had spent a few years with BC in the past. So all of our, or most of our linebackers are in the will linebacker position with experience playing for the BC Lions and in BC Place, which is cool. And then you look backing up Micah Alway at the middle linebacker position, which I think, he had himself a game. Blake, I don't know if you were able to catch the play that was probably brought back, and if you weren't able to see it, it would probably unfortunately wouldn't have been talked about. But Jeremy Lewis, it looks like, will back up
Yeah, I
potentially
did
at middle
hear about that.
linebacker. He had obviously the interception in the game and what looked like to be a strip fumble return for a touchdown. Unfortunately, the strip fumble that returned for a touchdown got the call on the field got reversed to forward progress had been ruled stopped and the runner had been ruled down. And unfortunately for him, because I think it was pretty bang bang, it was a pretty bang bang play and close call. And I think unfortunately for him, because in replay you're slowing it down, it's not in full motion. It doesn't look probably as close as it was, and I think kind of went the wrong way for him. But he was that close to having an interception in the game, a forced fumble recovery for a touchdown, where I believe he returned it about 100 or 110 yards from the opposite goal line to the other end zone. And then obviously Matt Baker asked him jokingly after the game, have you caught your breath yet? He kind of collapsed in the opposite end zone. The kind of the trainers had to come out in the field, and I don't know if they brought him to IV, but kind of attend to him. And I'm sure that his teammates, jokingly kind of ripped him of, obviously the long run. He mistakenly said that it was 120 yards. It's actually 110 yards of the CFL field, but it still is a long way. It is no joke to do that, especially in the middle of the game. But just shout out to Jeremy Lewis. I think that probably solidified him on the roster, Blake, of making the team, making two big plays like that. I think arguably that strip fumble should have probably run the BC Lions the game. I think if that happens, if that's uh, if the call on the field stands, the Edmonton Elks don't have the ball and aren't able to score, get close to the BC Lions and make it that 20-19 victory. I think the game probably ends up being a Lions victory because of Jeremy Lewis. And I think that ultimately goes a long way into him making the roster. We look at Sam linebacker position, Blake, where I have Tyler Coyle here as of now into the starting lineup positioned. It's where he's been taking most of the snaps in training camp. We saw him make a play in Victoria. He had the interception down on PJ Walker, I believe, in Victoria versus the Calgary Stampeders in week number 1 of the preseason. I think he is going to be the starter at Sam linebacker or the nickel position, as I said. But Deontay Williams, there's been some rumblings that he potentially could be the starter at Sam, and then they could shuffle around. Tyler Coyle potentially being the backup, maybe at Sam. If Deontay Williams does move in at Sam, like I said, there could be some shuffling to Edwards Cooper going out to play that field cornerback position. Ronald Kent going over to play the boundary halfback position. Then a guy like Carter Jr. I forget his name. We'll talk about him in a second here. Robert Carter Jr. playing the field halfback position. But Blake, when it comes to the linebacker position, Ben Haladic, Micah Alway going to be their starters, as well as Tyler Coyle being the starter at Sam. When we look at as well Josh Woods being on the sidelines with him being a pretty good addition throughout the season at some point, whether he is a guy that as we said about Keon Hatcher, maybe we see the best of Josh Woods next season, which is unfortunate, but at some point he's going to be back on the roster this year contributing, whether it's on special teams or not. How you feeling about the linebacker positions with guys like Haladic, Awe, and Coyle being the potential starters as of now?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the Lions to add Mike Alway. Of course, he started his career in BC here with before moving over to the Stampeders. And you and I talked in free agency when they first made the signing that Mike Alway is a guy that plays to the line. Sometimes, unfortunately for him, especially in his Calgary career, he stepped over the line a little bit more than he should be. But he's someone that plays with a lot of fire, a lot of passion. And I'm really excited to see what he can bring to this linebacking core, as well as Ben Haladic, who got more confident, got better as the season went on last season. And I expect that to continue into this season, as well as the defensive ends who we're going to talk about here momentarily.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget, Blake, that I believe Ben Halak was the first ever Canadian to have, I might be mistaken on this, but first ever Canadian to have 100 tackles in the season, dating back to that 2023 campaign. Last year, he took a little bit of a step back in terms of production on the field, dealt with some injuries, also dealt with the loss of Josh Woods without his running mate beside him at the linebacker position, having to shuffle over to play middle linebacker. Obviously, he had his best season at middle linebacker, but with Josh Woods coming onto the scene last season, starting at middle linebacker to start the season, Halak slid over to that will linebacker position, and then when Woods went down, had to go back over to the middle linebacker position and kind of play there for the rest of the season. So I'm interested to see what happens there, as well as who's the game one starter at our Sam linebacker position. So in the defensive line, or line on the defensive line, Blake, we have from right to left here, I guess. Um, this is going to be a projection here, and I think is going to be definitely a game time decision. It could be any number of guys who we'll end up talking about here in a second in terms of guys that are on the practice roster. But right now I have Kameka Toure starting at right end, as well as Ty Crawford. And then at the three tech defensive tackle, I have Dwayne Hendricks, as well as Marcus Moore, who Marcus Moore had himself a good preseason, especially down in Victoria versus Calgary. At the one tech position, it appears that there's rave reviews from Jonah Tavai out of camp, and that he has been running with the first team and projected as the starter over Christian Covington for now. But I would imagine Christian Covington is still going to get his snaps in there throughout the game and will be a contributor throughout the season. And then, of course, as I said, Covington being the backup at one tech for right now. And then at left end, one Matthew Betts, who I think we all are hoping to get back to form. I think this is going to be an interesting position because there's going to be a lot of shuffling in terms of names. I think the only kind of names that probably are in Sharpie, which are even eye raising when it comes to leaving one guy off the list, but Betts for sure, Dwayne Hendricks, Jonah Tabai will be one of them, with Christian Covington probably not being in the starting lineup. I think Marcus Moore could potentially be listed as a right end and be in the starting lineup as well because he has that position flexibility, but Marcus Moore being more of a defensive tackle might be a backup behind Dwayne Hendricks. But like I said, he had a good showing down in Victoria, had one sack on the day, dealing with an injury even down in Victoria as well, being poked in the eye when his helmet came off. Now, opposite of Matthew Betts, I think is going to be a little bit of a revolving door until Sione Tama gets back, and hopefully Sione Tama is able to come back and be productive, which we've said numerous times. We just kind of think that, obviously Betts being Batman, can he find a Robin like back in 2022 with, 2023 with David Menard, who was his running mate, had a very productive season, took a lot of pressure off him throughout the season. I think that's super important for Betts having success this season. We will get into the practice roster and who could potentially be at defensive end in week one as well, because I think it's not for certain, although there's been a lot of reviews or a lot of I guess positive talk for Kameka Toure, a former NFL draft pick for the Indianapolis Colts. Baker's been talking highly of him, as well as the Bob the Moj Vardanovich, voice of the BC Lions. But Blake, before we get into the practice roster, what are your thoughts on the defensive line? With obviously Covington potentially being a backup and hopefully Matthew Betts returning to form.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's the only surprise. I hadn't even heard that, so I wasn't aware of Jonah Tavai getting the start, if you will, over Christian Covington. But I think definitely that Matthew Betts, we would expect him to be better this year. Much similar to Nathan Rourke. Like, he might not be 2022 Nathan Rourke, of course, with Matthew Betts. It might be that he might not be 2023 Matthew Betts when he set, of course, the Canadian CFL record for sacks in a season. But if he's even 75% of what that is, that would be a very productive season. Like, that's most likely over 10 sacks, 12, 13 sacks in a season. And for any defensive lineman, that would be considered a very, very good season. And for Matthew Betts, I think he expects that almost out of himself because let's not forget, before that record breaking season, he had 10, 11 sacks in the season before. And that's what led to the record breaking season of 2023.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the depth chart is unofficial, or as you can see up top, it is unofficial. This is just kind of my projection or rough projection with guys that are available to place where, with cut down day being uh, yesterday technically, but we saw officially, I think things start to come out this morning on the behalf of the BC Lions. So this is kind of how things could potentially look with obviously the next slide, which I'll bring in here, Blake, which will be the practice roster as well as the 1 game IR, 6 game IR, with the suspended list being here as well. So I'll go over the practice roster first, Blake, which is a 10-man practice roster. That are guys that are on the team but are on the practice team or practice roster. They'll practice with the team, but they're not officially a part of the active roster, but they could be placed on the active roster throughout the season and can come and go as they please, I believe. So um, it is also 10 practice roster players with a global player being, I think, as a non-counter on the list here, Blake.
Yeah, I was
So
going to say that I'm counting 11 there, but
yeah. So starting at number one, we have Alex Berwick, offensive lineman, actually a draft pick for the BC Lions this past season out of the University of Western. Offensive lineman who has center, pretty plays center with some position flexibility. We saw him be the jumbo tight end down in Victoria. So I think keep an eye on him. If injuries start to happen, he could be elevated onto the active roster throughout the season. Forgive me, folks, for some of these name pronunciations as well. I don't have official pronunciation, so I could be butchering them, and hopefully I'm not. But Traven Blaylock, DB, which is who is an American. Ross Bolger, punter slash kicker, a global player. Jaleel Clemens, D lineman, American. Deshaun Fenwick, running back, American. Cam Foran, long snapper, national. Yes, Blake, we kept a long snapper on the practice roster. I don't know why, but hey, we kept him. Tyron Hunt, offensive lineman, American. Maybe one of the better names you'll find out there, or maybe part of the all-name team in the CFL. Seven McGee. He also wears seven double sevens, which
yeah, I
if
was
Blake,
wishing he would have made the active roster, but
I don't know if you knew the reasoning behind his name, but he actually has six sisters, and he is the seventh sibling, and the I
oh
believe
my
only
gosh.
male in his sibling tree. So Seven McGee was born in that family. Wide receiver, American, another faster guy, could be a potential return candidate as well as being elevated throughout the year to be a receiver. Devin Richardson was talked highly about at a linebacker position to potentially be a starter. I think just linebacker was very deep position for the Lions, and I'm glad they're able to stash him on the practice roster. He is an American. Ezekiel Tide, as I mentioned before, I thought he could be in the running for being on the active roster over a guy like Kieran Passant, but they go with Passant over Tide. Tide being last year's draft pick, I
Yeah.
believe the second round draft pick from last year out of Concordia University. And then last, Jalen Williams, defensive back American with NFL experience. Glad they were able to stash him on the practice roster as well. So, Blake, we look over to the left here before we get all a little bit confusing here. Hopefully, people are following along. The suspended list. Obviously, Sione Tama is on that as of now. He'll be brought back at some point throughout the season. I'm going to go
Yeah,
down, Blake,
I
but
believe it was a 6 game suspension, was it not?
I thought that as well. So we go down to the 6 game IR list first, and I'm going to go with Adam O'Clair, linebacker, national. Actually, forgive me, that should be in orange. And then Josh Woods, linebacker, American, as well as David Foucault, offensive lineman, national. David Foucault, as you said, I think it's a break from everybody that was talking in Edmonton. I would think his season is likely over. Josh Woods, I think, is going to be brought back at some point. Does he spend the entire length of his time on the 6 game? I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's brought back at some point. What you're able to do, they do not count towards the salary cap going into the season if they start on the 6 game IR and can be brought back at any point, or be brought in, excuse me, to the 1 game IR and then to the active roster, I think is what the process is. If not, they have to go, I think, 6 game IR, and then the seventh week is when they're able to play a
Mm-hmm.
game. So the 1 game IR is essentially a way to stash your guys that are on the active roster kind of off the roster, essentially, that are guys that are basically healthy scratches for a game. It is kind of the best way to put it for maybe hockey folks or Canadians that are listening. The 1 game IR is kind of like the healthy scratches, guys that are on the active roster but that aren't going to be dressed for said game. So as I mentioned with the D line, I think things could be changing on a weekly basis. Um, we'll talk about those when we get to them. But Traven Blaylock, uh, DB. Oh, excuse me, actually, Trayvon Blaylock should actually be off there because he's on the PR. Robert Carter Jr. should be the first guy on the 1 game practice IR. Excuse me, a guy that could potentially be on the active roster, but I think I just went with you only have 44 guys that can be active. Just the way that I went with roster construction, I think Robert Carter Jr. will be potentially on the 1 game IR until things change. But look out for him, folks. He could be a guy that could be active on game days. Nathan Cherry, defensive lineman, a national, could be another one. A former BC Lions draft pick who has struggled to stay healthy. He's had a good camp, but I think playing D tackle and just the guys ahead of him, he kind of is in a number predicament along with the guy that's in front of him, Thibaut Tobias, who's a veteran for the BC Lions the last couple of years, who's seen meaningful snaps for the BC Lions the last number of years, being one of the better global players, I think, throughout the CFL. Thibaut Tobias could be another guy that is active on game days. We see him be active throughout the last number of seasons for the BC Lions. Some games he's on the 1 game IR, just kind of like I mentioned, the healthy scratch thing. He could be active, could not be. Another guy that could be active is Deshaun Stevens, another national defensive lineman that could see snaps at defensive end, potentially backing up a guy like Matthew Betts, with Toure likely being the starter. If a guy like Ty Crawford isn't in the lineup, I think Deshaun Stevens could be given a jersey on game day and could be likely that other defensive lineman who's dressed. And then next on the 1 game IR is I actually don't know how to pronounce his first name, but is it Ilm Manning? You should. How do you the play by play guy? How do you announce
Yeah,
Manning, Mr.
I'd say
Manning's
that is ill.
Ilm Manning, offensive lineman, American, could potentially be a depth option for the Lions. I don't honestly know too much on him. Didn't hear too much, rumblings about him throughout camp. And then another guy, Tumase Lualale, a defensive lineman, American, as well as Anna Una, offensive lineman, a national. I don't know if it's long enough for the Lions to stash him on the 6 game IR. That would mean he is probably out for 6 games, 7 weeks. I think they're going to probably try to stash him on the 1 game IR with the hopes that they can bring him back within maybe a 1 month
Yeah.
period or something like that. So should be an interesting thing to monitor as well, Blake. So, Blake, is there any other thoughts for yourself on the practice roster, 1 game IR, 6 game IR suspended list?
No, as I said earlier, maybe about 28, 30 minutes ago in the recording, not a lot of surprises in general with the names that made the practice roster, with the names that made the active roster, and then of course the 1 game and the 6 game, of course, David Foku. We already knew about that, and Unu, we already knew about that. Una, pardon me, we already knew about that. So I would say the Lions are one of the few teams that didn't make a big splash, if you will, with one of their cuts.
Yes, indeed, Blake. So 6:15, Blake. We want to get you out here at 6:30. I think I'm gonna get you till about 6:35 because I know I technically could have had you till 6:45. So we're gonna go a little late as usual, but give me 15 minutes to go over this next segment with 5 minutes to close it out, and I think chef kiss for the week. So, Blake, what I wanted to do is go over our top 5 storylines. Excuse me, I guess I should say my top 5 storylines without filling you in with my storylines. But, Blake, quickly on the fly, if you want to think of some, we can go over them quickly as well. But I'll give you them quickly out loud, and then I'm going to go over them 5 down to 1. So I'll give you them quickly before I get into detail with them, Blake. So, starting at number 5, I have, will the defense improve under coach Mike Benevides? My top 5 storylines, that being number 5. At number 4, I have, how impactful can Matthew Betts be this season? At number 3, I have can Buck Pierce prove he is a legit head coach? At number 2, I have will the offensive line be good enough? And at number 1, what Nathan Rourke do we get this season? So, as I mentioned, I'm going to go from 5 down to 1. I'll go a little bit in detail here, Blake, and then we'll give it to you, and we can kind of break things down. You can give your opinion and maybe how you have things listed for your top 5 storylines going into the season, Blake. So, at number 5, will the defense improve under Coach Mike Benevides? And Blake, you and I have had this conversation this past offseason, probably around the time Mike Benevides got hired, of some of the candidates that were out there. Of you and I, we've seen this story in the past, or we've seen this movie in the past, is maybe a better way to put it, of Mike Benevides as defensive coordinator with the BC Lions. He's obviously spent time with the Lions for numerous years in the past, being the team's special teams coordinator, defensive coordinator, as well as the team's head coach, Blake. Special teams coordinator from 2003 to 2007, the defensive coordinator from 2008 to 2011, obviously with winning the 2011 Grey Cup, and then the team's head coach from 2012 to 2014. In 2012, he finished with a record of 13-5, which was first in the Western Division. In 2013, he finished with a record of 11-7, which was third in the West Division. And then in 2014, which was his last season as a head coach, he was 9-9, which was fourth in the West Division. So I think there is some high hopes for Mike Benevides for the familiarity there. I think a lot of fans like Mike Benevides, the person. I think it's easy to root for Mike Benevides, but I think there's some question marks in terms of production on the field. The Lions team last season, Blake, I think it's unfortunate that they were kind of a lot more towards the middle of the pack in terms of statistic categories for team defense, and for them, not being, good enough to be in the, elite, I guess you could say, and not bad enough to be amongst the worst in the league. I think they were kind of around the middle, unfortunately for them, which cost them a lot of games. There were some games that they were, by all means, around the bottom of the CFL in terms of giving up points,
Mhm.
yardages, and stuff like that. I think for them, the things that they need to do better this season are the little things, like of uh, you know, securing tackles, not giving up, big plays and yak yardage and stuff like that. The discipline, I think, aspect of not taking too many penalties. I think the Lions were amongst the higher defensive penalties per game team in the CFL. I think things like getting more turnovers, as I mentioned last season, Blake, of, it seemed like the defensive backs and some of those linebackers, the guys that were in position to have turnovers last season, are in position to, break on balls and get up pass breakups, were one step behind at most points and throughout the season. Of, if they were one step closer, they would have been, in position to get interception or break up passes and stuff like that. Where the Lions, I think, were so close to being in position, but we're that one step behind, of just maybe whether it's, the lack of belief, or maybe it's a lack of, just trusting in your ability of, seeing what you believe and doing it, right? Of, just jumping on the ball. That split second can, be the difference in professional sports, right? The high level of play that's being going on. So I think the Lions defense as well, Blake, needs to be better when it comes to being more physical. I think we saw them being run on in the past few years of, the teams like Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, when it comes to playoff football, being able to, have a backbone and kind of stick up for yourselves and be able to stand up for yourselves in the run game, right? I think additions like Dwayne Hendricks, Micah Alway, guys that are physical presence who we've heard being talked about in that aspect. You just mentioned a few minutes ago, Blake, where a guy like Micah Alway kind of rides that edge of kind of going too far with playing on that edge of being, just right in terms of the physicality side of things in football. So number 5, how much can the defense of the BC Lions improve under Mike Benevides? I think is a big question mark to follow along the season, especially with, RP, a voice that was the leader of the defense in the past few years, still in house in the building. I think the great thing for the BC Lions is that's going to be a positive relationship going forward, that there's not going to be too many rifts, or there's not going to be any rifts, I should say, between a guy like Ryan Phillips, who respects Mike Benavides, his former coach, obviously being his defensive coordinator when, they won. He was a player of that 2011 team. I think Mike Benavides was on the team, on the staff in 2006 when RP was a part of that 2006 Grey Cup team as well. So number 5, will the defense improve under Mike Benavides? Number 4, how impactful can Matthew Betts be? I think this will go a long way to helping out the rest of the defense as well, Blake, when it comes to Matthew Betts. If he can get to the quarterback, that much faster, I think that means the defensive line, or excuse me, the defensive backfield doesn't have to cover for so long, right? If he can, get to the quarterback so fast, that means hopefully other teams are sliding to his way and creating one-on-one opportunities for other defensive linemen to eat and start to go off and create sacks and create big plays for for themselves, as well as hopefully keep linebackers clean with them having to pay so much attention to Matthew Betts. That hopefully keeps linebackers clean coming downhill. I think the unfortunate thing for Matthew Betts is he might get some unfair expectations with, as you said, setting the Canadian record for sacks in the season with 18 in 2023, breaking was it Jabbar is it Jabbar Westerman and Brent Johnson's record,
Yeah,
um,
tied record.
tied record of 17. Matthew Betts getting 18 in 2023. He goes down to the NFL, signs in February or sometime after the Super Bowl, excuse me, with the Detroit Lions. He ends up getting cut in August. He kind of does the same thing as Nathan Rourke. The signed on Wednesday, ends up playing on Saturday, ends up recording a sack, I believe, in the game. But when you look at the totality of last season, Blake, 7 games played, only 2 sacks, 13 tackles. I will remind folks that he did have the one interception return for a touchdown that basically won the game for the BC Lions, who were struggling versus the Calgary Stampeders last season in a game late last year in BC Place. Matthew Betts with the interception return for a touchdown ends up basically, like I said, winning the game for the BC Lions. I think, can he get back to a similar level of play to 2023? I think is probably the, appropriate expectations for me, Blake, of, for me, can he get 12 to 15 sacks? I think is kind of that sweet
Hmm.
spot, right? If he can get 12 sacks is I think a good season. If he can get 15 sacks is probably a great season for Matthew Betts, considering the state of the rest of the defensive line as well. So for me, as I said, the expectations, how much does that come into play now with, in 2023, he was coming off a 7 sack season in 2022 where the Lions kind of, you know, believed in him coming off a 0 sack season with the Edmonton Elks in 2021. The former first round pick, number 3 overall, kind of been labeled as a bust coming to BC. BC believes in him, giving him his opportunity, as I think we saw with him kind of showing some, um, what's the word I guess I'm looking for of like
Potential.
well, I guess loyalty with
Yeah.
loyalty with BC. I mean, of goes to the NFL, he comes back with rumors of potentially going to maybe Montreal, right? With him being a Montreal boy, he shows loyalty to BC of wanting to come back and show because of the love that they showed Montreal or the belief that they showed in Matthew Betts. Now Matthew Betts, Blake, is the they made him the highest paid defensive player back in December, right? Of now he's going to make 260K this upcoming season, 270K with 600 with 6K bonuses in each season. So the money's there. Do expectations maybe get in the way a little bit more now? I think that's a question mark, but I think Matthew Betts is going to be able to put expectations aside and live up to the contract and be able to walk away this season with 12 plus sacks. I think is kind of my expectations for Matthew Betts. So number 3, Blake, as I said, can Buck Pierce prove he is legit head coach? We look at Buck Pierce, Blake, who the last few seasons with Winnipeg obviously going to 5 straight Grey Cups, representing the Western Division 5 straight times. I think people are maybe a little bit blinded or jaded by the last few Grey Cup losses, the last 3 specifically, maybe even specifically the most recent one in the 111th Grey Cup of
Hmm.
a lot of fans putting blame or heat at the feet of Buck Pearson, the way he called games, maybe staining the way he's looked at or viewed throughout the CFL community. I think I would remind people of the success they had in the regular season and other playoff performances throughout his tenure with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But I also think there is a lack of long term experience when it comes to his coaching resume. When you look at only being a play caller from 2021 to 2024, with his head coaching experience, or excuse me, his coaching experience with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, that's all he's ever known, right? With being the running back coach from 2014 to 2015. He took over as quarterback coach in 2016 to 2019, and then took over, as I said, after COVID, the 2020 season being scrapped. He took over as offensive coordinator going into COVID, but obviously didn't getting his first season until 2021. and then his last being 2024 this past season with Winnipeg. Obviously, spent some time as a player with the BC Lions, Blake, which is his ties there, dating back to 2005 to 2009. Then he left to Winnipeg. Obviously, the ties to playing for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers versus the BC Lions in that 2011 Grey Cup. So I
Yeah.
was on the wrong side of things for that one, obviously.
Starting
But
QB in that game.
yes, obviously on the wrong side of that game for Winnipeg, but that little tie there to playing BC in a Grey Cup for a Grey Cup win for the BC Lions. He came back to the Lions in 2013 before ultimately retiring, as I said, and then going into the coaching field in 2014. I'm curious, Blake, of as I said, the heat of the Grey Cup losses, most recently the 111th Grey Cup, kind of lay at the feet of Buck Pierce, right? Of the lack of maybe feeding a guy like Brady Oliveira this past year, Zach Collaros being injured with his finger injury. Why not go to the run game a little bit more? And they tried to kind of just till the wheels fall off with Zach Collaros, try to let him pass with four fingers on his throwing finger, finger, and it didn't go so well in terms of putting up points. But what I would say is I think you know, as I said, the success in the regular season and going for most outstanding or helping Zach
Hmm.
Claros win most outstanding player, Brady Oliveira win most outstanding player, I think goes a long way. I think I'm interested to see Blake, and I was kind of going to put together a little bit of what we are going to maybe see in terms of philosophy and his kind of bread and butter from Buck Pierce as a play caller, which is that downhill running ability, which in the past has been Brady Oliveira, Andrew Harris. We're going to probably see James Butler, Xander Horvath, that downhill running ability, that east-west threat in terms of as I said, with that Nick Dembski type player, we're gonna kind of find out who that's going to be in the Lions offense. I kind of maybe said it's going to be a Jermaine Jackson in terms of that jet sweep, gadget type player who's going to be brought in motion, maybe for some of that eye candy stuff. But a lot of the time there's going to be those jet sweeps, which I said we saw in Victoria. We saw Nick Dembski do it for years in Winnipeg. The play action of the fake the run, a guy kind of comes in motion, kind of comes clean outside the back, kind of comes clean out of the backside of the formation because they're kind of running that play action. Um, it's kind of in the Raiders playbook, or like in my junior playbook, Blake, we kind of call it a inside zone slice, where a guy comes in motion, comes out the backside of the run play and is wide open. We kind of saw Dalton Schoen run it multiple times in the previous years for Winnipeg, and I think like I said, the east-west ability to attack going sideways, not so much north-south. What they're going to do with James Butler, but that ability to attack east-west using your speed, your skill players, and then the ability to go heavy, go in that jumbo tight end, double tight end set, and set up play action and let Nathan Rourke attack deep down the field. And then you know, not number one, but I guess down the list of kind of things that I'm excited is, the corner route, like of how many years or how many times have we seen it in the past few years of, knowing guys like Dalton Schoen and Nick Dempsey are going to run a corner and,
And
not
we
being able to
still
stop
can't
it.
stop it.
And you still can't stop it. I really hope that that Buck Pierce brings it to BC of, guys like Justin McInnes, Keon Hatcher, Javon Gatoy running those corner routes, and teams know what's coming and they can't stop it because of how they're able to scheme it up, how they're able to set up play action, how they're able to make it look like there's going to be a run play, pull it out of the belly of James Butler. Nathan Rourke is, on the move on a bootleg, and a guy like Justin McInnes, as I mentioned, is running a corner behind the secondary and going for a touchdown. So that's something I'm looking forward to, and I think is going to be an interesting one to see how Buck Pierce puts his imprint on this offense. At number two, Blake, which is arguably number one with the injuries we saw in training camp with going to George Uno. We talked about David Foucault, but will the offensive line be good enough for the BC Lions to have success for this year? Obviously, we saw with the urgency this offseason, so early in the offseason, the BC Lions going out, trading a second round pick, Ryder Varga, Canadian national linebacker, to the Toronto Argonauts for right tackle Dejon Allen, former most outstanding offensive lineman in 2023 for the Toronto Argonauts, bringing him over to solidify your tackle positions with Darrell Broxton. As I mentioned, the Lions, arguably the best offensive lineman for the BC Lions before Dejon Allen coming over at left tackle, now solidified alongside Dejon Allen at right tackle. I like what I'm seeing for the Lions at tackle. Now, in the interior, I think is one thing, and is going to be a lot of question marks needing to be answered with obviously the injuries being happening, and then Corey Woodruff relatively being a question mark at left guard. Although we are high on Corey Woodruff as a starter, I think we are hopeful for him to pan out as a starter for the BC Lions. It's kind of unproven how he's going to turn out at left guard as a starter as of now. And then you look at right guard; it's kind of unproven who's going to even start there to begin with. Chris Slugger, obviously, you and I are both fans of him, but who knows what's going to happen long term, and if he can kind of step up to the plate with obviously Suk Chung moving on. He was long-term starter at right guard in the past few seasons for the Lions, a fan favorite, BC boy, and a guy who was once playing at a high level. Obviously, kind of had a down year last season, and rightfully the Lions moved on with him. With kind of at some point you have to try to improve the offensive line at some position, and they're going to try to do so with what looks to be Chris Slugger. I think the question marks begin in the interior and work their way out in terms of depth at the tackle position. So will the offensive line be good enough? I think the scheme, Blake, lastly on the kind of the offensive line, will go a long way into helping out the offensive line when it comes to run first. Now they're going to have to be good when it comes to being run first, right? Because if they're not opening up run lanes and if they're having troubles run blocking, then it's going to be a tough. It's going to be tough sledding for the entire offensive. It's going to be tough for the entire offense as a whole. Um, but where I think it's going to help the offensive line in terms of the scheme is that play action threat and that double tight end threat. I think Blake will be able to help the offensive line. The play action threat I think will help slow up the defensive line, not let them pin their ears back. And then the double tight ends, obviously, there's going to be 7 guys in pass protection. More guys, the better. So curious to see how the offensive line plays throughout the season because, as I said, Blake, you could argue that the BC Lions have been trying to upgrade and improve the offensive line dating back to the Mike Riley era, dating back to post COVID and the transition from Mike Riley going into Nathan Rourke into Vernon Adams back to Nathan Rourke. So, lastly, what Nathan Rourke do we get? Blake, obviously, this is no surprise and not anything I need to go over too long of how I feel about Nathan Rourke, who was on a historic pace in 2022, who I might remind folks of, through 10 games, Blake, he was, 255 completions, 324 attempts. He had 3,349 passing yards for 25 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, while also having 39 carries for 304 yards and 7 touchdowns. So through 10 games, having 32 total touchdowns, the historic pace that he was on to touch maybe be close to 6,000 yards. As I said, I think is an unfair expectations for fans to think he's going to get back to that level of play. I think is somewhere in the middle of I would say 4,500 yards to about 5,200 5,200 yards is kind of my expectations for Nathan Rourke. Somewhere in around 35 touchdowns to 40 touchdowns, I think is fair expectations. And I'm really excited to see how he gets back to level of play. Obviously, with it's been talked about so much of everything he's been dealt the past few years of 5 playbooks in one year, going to the NFL, not really getting a true shot or fair shot what he thought he would get in the NFL, proving himself in a preseason game, but not really getting a fair opportunity in the regular season with the Jacksonville Jaguars. As I said, the 5 different playbooks coming back to BC, quick turnaround, trying to start a game that first week. I think as we've kind of heard now, there's a rejuvenation to Nathan Rourke of, he seems a lot more happy. He seems a lot more okay doing the media stuff. He seems a lot more bought into being the face of the franchise and being obviously with, marketing money, probably helping a little bit with being paid 200K per season the next few years. That's something that I think probably lastly I could talk about of, now he's the highest paid player in the CFL, has that expectations, and can he live up to that hype of, whatever it is, 600 plus K of, I think the total money is 600K, but I think it's a 400 plus cap hit and 200K in marketing money, as I mentioned, of being the face of not only the BC Lions, but the face of the CFL and taking that on, head on of, yeah, you might not want to do a halftime interview down in Victoria, but guess what, Nathan? That's just kind of the road, the bed that you have to lie in because of who you are, the contract you signed, and the expectations of being Kid Canada, being the face of the league. You're paid as such, and kind of having to put a smile on your face to do so. So I think you and I are both as high on Nathan as most people, and it's kind of at this point, can he live up to the hype? And not even maybe can he live up to the hype, but can he get back to being Nathan Rourke, that very elite self, and being the face of the league, rightfully so, and being the best quarterback in the league, which I think you and I both think he can. I think there's some question marks of, there's still, you know, no Brian Burnham, no Lucky Whitehead. A few of those guys that were there in 2022 were some security blankets for him. But even a guy like Dominic Grimes, who was maybe arguably his a number one receiver that season, I'm very interested to see what Nathan Rourke we get this season as well. So those are my top five storylines for the BC Lions going into the 2025 season. Blake, before we get out of here, buddy, I'm going to pass things back over to you. What are your thoughts on my top five storylines going into the season, and what you've been thinking this whole time, or just kind of any other storylines that you maybe like to add in or anything like that?
No, I think you did a pretty good job of actually covering it all, Cole. I agree with all of that. Of course, the defense as a whole and Matthew Betts, they kind of go together. But I would say that, especially later on last season, the defense let the Lions down towards the end of the year and when they kind of started slumping. And of course, in that playoff loss as well, the defense, especially near the end of the game, like the defense needed a stop at the end of the game, and they just, unfortunately for them, didn't get it. Like when they needed to hold the Riders to no points, they gave them a field goal and stuff like that. And as far as you mentioned about Buck Pierce, I'm really excited to see him as a head coach and Nathan Rourke as well. Like I think last year really did take a toll on Nathan. Him coming back with the way he did, the marketing money, as you said, having to do like the halftime interviews and everything like that, and just the whole year in general really took a toll on him. He's not going to have anything to worry about this year. He knows he's the number one quarterback. He knows he's going to have to do the off the field stuff like that. He's ready for the challenge. And I really truly believe that he is ready to be the most outstanding player in the CFL, and he's ready to lead the Lions to a hopeful Grey Cup.
Blake, you get me fired up there, buddy. He's ready to be the most outstanding player in the CFL. Well, Blake, thank you for joining me, buddy. I know you got to go, so let's put a bow on this thing and wrap things up. I was going to do it for Blake and I. Of course, we got a couple reminders, folks, but I was going to do it for Blake and I for our final roster reaction and our top five storylines to follow for the BC Lions in 2025. Before we get out of here, though, Blake, of course, we got a few reminders. Folks, we have CFL football officially to talk about this week with the regular season kicking off on Thursday with the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Ottawa Redblacks. Of course, you're going to be seeing Blake and I's face a whole lot more. So get used to it. Put a smile on your face, Blake, and get used to seeing us, folks, whether you like it or not. You're going to start with the weekly show on a Wednesday night where you can see Blake, myself, Coach, and Shane over on the 13th Man Football YouTube channel. So head over there, subscribe, hit the notification button, and you guys will notify every time we go live. That's going to be a lot of fun this week when we do, obviously, our picks, talking about news, cuts. I'm sure all of the reaction to depth charts and stuff like that. So head on over there, subscribe as I mentioned, and get ready for all the fun. And then Blake is TBD as of now in terms of whether or not he's going to be able to make it for this week for our preview show, which is going to be dropping on Thursday evening on our Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. We're going to be joined by one Andrew Hoskins from the Turf District, host of the Turf District, to break down and preview this week's week one game versus the Edmonton Elks. And that is going to be releasing to you guys Thursday evening, probably about, I would say, 4 o'clock Pacific time. We're going to have that up to you guys on Thursday. And then, folks, Friday, of course, well, Thursday, that is going to be, kickoff day. And obviously, we're going to be enjoying the first game of the regular season. Friday, I hope you guys enjoy some Friday night football. And then Saturday is kickoff, and Blake and I will be back in BC Place watching our BC Lions. I'm very excited, Blake, as I'm sure you are as well. TBD for a post-game show right now. I think it's going to be a quick turnaround for your boy out of there. I think the more likely thing is probably going to be a upload on Sunday morning, and I think Blake will probably be a TBD for that one as well, because I believe Blake is a busy guy on Sunday, and then Blake, actually, it is my first round of flag playoffs Sunday morning, so that's why I have to have a
Yeah,
quick turnaround
I
out
might
of
be
there.
able to do a quick turnaround Sunday afternoon, but Sunday morning, I am coaching, so Sunday morning's kind of out for me. But
So TBD, but that is what the schedule looks like for this week, folks. Stick around, and as I said, follow our social medias. That is probably the best way to stay updated for when we are going to be doing our post game show. That is going to be kind of our TBD as of now and throughout the season. But other than that, as I said, the weekly show is going to come out every Wednesday night with Coach Shane, Blake, and I. The post game show every throughout the regular season is going to come out the the day before. So the BC Lions are playing on Saturday. It's not going to come out on Friday. It's going to come out on the Thursday night. So if the BC Lions are playing on a Friday, it's going to come out on Wednesday night. If the BC Lions are playing on a Thursday, it's going to come out on a Tuesday night. So that's going to be the schedule for the previews. And other than that, I think please, guys, it would be greatly appreciated to leave a like on the video. Please feel free to comment down below. Comment down below your top 5 storylines to follow. Comment down below how you're feeling about the BC Lions roster and how the depth chart is kind of shaking out, what your reaction is to that. And of course, Blake, the most important thing to do is to smash the subscribe button to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel as we are chasing 400 subscribers. It would be greatly appreciated. And of course, you guys can follow us on our social media platforms at Canadian Football Fanatics on Instagram and at underscore CF Fanatics on Twitter. That's going to do it for Blake and I on our BC Lions depth chart reaction. And we will see you guys on another video.